The sun hadn't yet risen when the bitter wind swept across the empty park, howling through the trees like a mournful ghost. Frost clung to the edges of the iron bench, coating its slats with a layer of icy dew. On that bench, small, shivering, and alone, sat a puppy, no older than a few months, curled into a tight ball as if trying to disappear into himself. His short fur was damp with dew, his little paws tucked beneath his thin belly for warmth, and his ears twitched with every gust of wind. There was a patchy blue scarf wrapped awkwardly around his neck, far too large for him, and beside him lay an old paper coffee cup, empty and knocked over. The only sound he made was a soft whimper that quickly got lost in the wind. The puppy had been there since the night before. No one had noticed. Nobody was around when the dark hours took over the city. The nearby street lamps flickered weakly, casting a golden glow that barely reached the bench where he waited. He didn't understand why the person he loved most in the world had walked him into the park, told him to stay here, and walked away. He had obeyed because that's what good puppies do. He stayed. Even when the wind grew stronger, even when the sky turned black, even when his belly started to ache with hunger and his tiny body trembled uncontrollably, he stayed. Because he believed they would come back. Morning broke slowly. Pale light stretched across the horizon, but the cold didn't lift. The puppy raised his head weakly as the sound of footsteps began to fill the once empty paths. Joggers, in beanies and thermal jackets, passed by, their breath steaming in the air. A couple walked briskly, holding coffee cups, chatting softly. And every time someone walked near his bench, the puppy's ears perked and he lifted his tiny face, eyes wide and hopeful. His tail, despite being weighed down by exhaustion and cold, gave a hopeful little thump. Maybe this person was the one. Maybe they came back. But no one stopped. They glanced, some frowning in confusion or pity. A few murmured things to each other. Poor thing. Whose dog is that? But they kept walking. One man even knelt to snap a picture of him with his phone, muttering something about posting it in the neighborhood group before walking off. The puppy didn't understand any of it. He just kept looking, waiting, hopeful. Time dragged on. The sun hung low behind thick gray clouds. Snowflakes began to fall, lightly at first, then steadily, painting the world in white. The puppy was barely moving now. His breathing had slowed, his eyelids heavy. He wanted to sleep, just for a little bit, but a deep, primal fear kept him awake. Something inside him whispered that if he closed his eyes for too long, he might not open them again. Still, his tiny body was losing the fight. He lay his head down on the bench's frozen wooden slat and blinked slowly, watching the world blur and fade. Across the street, inside a small diner with fogged-up windows, a woman named Claire was wrapping up her overnight shift. A paramedic for over 20 years, she had seen suffering in all its forms. But something about this morning made her uneasy. Maybe it was the way the storm rolled in so suddenly, or the heaviness in her chest she couldn't quite explain. She pulled her coat tighter as she stepped outside, thermos in hand, eyes scanning the emptying park across the street. And that's when she saw it. At first, she thought it was just a clump of snow stuck on the bench. But then the clump moved. Barely. A tiny, shivering creature lifted its head weakly and looked up at a passing couple before laying back down. Claire didn't hesitate. She dashed across the street, her boots crunching on frozen grass, heart pounding. As she neared the bench, her breath caught. The puppy was so small, so fragile, with trembling legs and sad, glassy eyes. His ribs were faintly visible beneath his fur, and ice clung to his whiskers. His tail gave a slow, feeble wag as she approached. "Hey, baby," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "What are you doing out here?" She crouched, down, reaching out carefully. The puppy didn't flinch. He simply looked at her as if asking, "Are you the one I've been waiting for?" Claire took off her scarf and gently wrapped it around his tiny body, cradling him in her arms like something sacred. He was ice cold, his little heart fluttering like a bird's wing against her chest. "It's okay," she murmured, rocking him gently. "You're safe now, I've got you." And for the first time since being left, the puppy closed his eyes. Not from despair, but from the warmth of arms that promised he would never be alone again. Claire held the trembling puppy close to her chest as she walked briskly back toward the diner, the icy wind slicing across her face. Her boots crunched over a fresh dusting of snow, and her breath plumed out in hurried clouds. Inside her coat, the puppy was barely moving, his tiny frame pressed tightly against her as if he knew instinctively that she was his only chance. His head rested weakly against her collarbone, and every so often, his little body gave a shudder that made Claire hold him tighter. The diner's bell jingled as she burst through the door, startling the older waitress behind the counter. The scent of bacon and coffee wrapped around them, but Claire had only one priority. "Blankets. I need towels or blankets, anything warm," she called out. Without a moment's hesitation, the waitress dropped the coffee pot she'd been holding and rushed to the back. Claire laid the puppy gently on the bench seat of a booth near the heater, stripping off her coat and scarf to wrap him in a warm cocoon. The puppy barely stirred. His breathing was shallow, and his paws, when she touched them, were dangerously cold. The waitress returned with a stack of towels, her face etched with concern. "Sweet Lord," she whispered, handing them over. "Where'd you find him?" "On a park bench," Claire replied, not taking her eyes off the tiny creature in front of her. "He was just waiting. All night in the cold." The waitress shook her head slowly, muttering under her breath about the cruelty of people. Claire tucked the towels around the puppy's body, careful not to cover his face. She rubbed his sides gently to stimulate warmth, murmuring soft words of comfort. "It's okay, little guy. You're safe now. You're not alone." The puppy blinked up at her slowly, the hint of trust returning to his clouded eyes. Claire felt her heart crack open wider than she thought possible. She didn't know this pup's story, didn't know who left him or why, but something deep inside her whispered that this wasn't just a rescue. It was a meeting that needed to happen. She reached for her phone and called the emergency vet clinic she knew would be open. "I've got a severe case of exposure," she told them. "Puppy, hypothermic, possibly malnourished. I'm 10 minutes out." Then she turned to the waitress. "Can I borrow your car? I walk to work tonight, I'll bring it back." Without hesitation, the woman handed over her keys. "Just save that baby." Wrapped in towels and Claire's coat, the puppy was barely more than a bundle of bones and fur as she drove through the snow-dusted streets. The heater in the car blasted warmth, and she kept glancing down at the seat beside her, checking to make sure he was still breathing. "Hang in there, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're not going to die like this, not cold, not alone." The clinic lights glowed ahead like a lighthouse through fog. Claire parked, snatched up the bundle, and ran inside. "We've got you," the vet tech said, gently taking the puppy from her arms. "We'll do everything we can." Claire stood by helplessly as they took him into the back. Minutes felt like hours. She paced the waiting room, hands shoved deep into her pockets, her chest tight with fear. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, and she listened to the faint hum of machinery, her thoughts racing. Why had someone left him? What kind of person could abandon something so innocent, so loyal and trusting, to freeze alone on a park bench? She didn't have the answers. But what she did know was that he had fought to survive. That tiny body had clung to life with nothing but blind faith that someone would come. He had waited, watched, and believed. And now he had someone. A soft voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "Ma'am, he's stable. You can come see him." Claire followed the vet tech into a small recovery room, where the puppy lay curled in a heated blanket on a soft cushion. An IV line ran to his tiny foreleg, and his breathing was deeper now, more even. His eyes fluttered open when she approached. "Hey there, brave boy," she said gently. Kneeling beside him, he gave the faintest wag of his tail. It was barely perceptible, but it was there. Claire reached out and stroked his head, marveling at how soft his ears were despite the filth and cold. "You've got a fighter spirit," she whispered. "I think you were waiting for me." Vet came in then, a kind-faced woman in her 40s. He's lucky you found him when you did. Another hour in that cold and we'd be having a very different conversation. Claire swallowed hard and nodded. What now? We're warming him slowly, giving fluids, and starting him on antibiotics just in case. He's underweight and dehydrated, but there are no broken bones or internal injuries. He just needs love and time. Claire's eyes filled with tears. She had seen plenty of miracles in her line of work, pulling people from burning cars, resuscitating hearts that had stopped beating, but this one felt different. This wasn't about saving a life in the heat of a crisis. This was about restoring something deeper: trust, warmth, the belief that not all humans were cruel. She spent hours at the clinic, curled on the floor next to the recovery bed, her hand gently resting on the puppy's side. When he fell asleep, safe and warm for the first time in days, she whispered a promise into the silence. You waited for someone who wouldn't come back, but I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside that small, bright room, something fragile and beautiful began to bloom. A second chance born from the coldest morning. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the frosted windows of the veterinary clinic, casting long golden rays across the room. It wasn't much warmer outside, but inside, everything felt gentler, softer, safer. Claire sat in a chair beside the recovery kennel, her eyes fixed on the small bundle of fur nestled into the corner of a heated blanket. The puppy was sleeping soundly now, his breathing slow and steady. No more violent shivering, no more shallow gasps. Just peace. Fragile, precious peace. Claire had barely slept herself. Her paramedic shift was long over and she should have been in bed hours ago. But she couldn't bring herself to leave. She had never felt this kind of pull before, not even with some of her most critical human patients. Something about this little soul had anchored itself in her chest. Maybe it was the way he had looked up at every face in the park with such hopeful eyes. Or maybe it was the silent patience of a creature too small to understand cruelty, yet too loyal to give up on love. The vet walked in quietly, glancing at the monitor by the puppy's side and smiling. He's stronger today, eating small amounts, that's a good sign. Claire nodded, her eyes still locked on the puppy. Thank you for everything. The vet shrugged kindly. You're the one who saved him. Claire gave a tired laugh. I just found him. He did the hard part. He waited all night in the freezing cold, just waiting. There was a long pause before the vet spoke again. He needs a name. Claire looked at the puppy, her eyes misting. She hadn't thought that far ahead. This had all been survival mode. But now, as she watched his tiny body rise and fall with each breath, the thought of him not having a name felt unbearably sad. He had waited faithfully, and now he deserved to be called something more than puppy or sweetheart. How about Echo? She said softly. The vet tilted her head. Echo? Claire nodded slowly, a small smile forming. Because he waited so long for a voice to answer him, for someone to come, and because he kept believing, even when there was no reply. It's like he sent his hope out into the world, over and over, until someone finally came. The vet's eyes softened. Echo. I like it. As if hearing his new name, the puppy stirred. His eyes fluttered open and he lifted his head weakly, blinking at Claire. She leaned closer and placed her hand gently on his side. Hi, Echo, she whispered. That's you now. His tail gave a slow, grateful wag. By the afternoon, Echo had eaten a little more, and even attempted to sit up, though his muscles trembled from the effort. Claire stayed close, encouraging him gently, supporting his small frame when needed. She texted her job to explain she wouldn't be coming in today. Family emergency, she wrote. And for the first time in years, she felt no guilt about taking a day for herself. This was exactly where she needed to be. Later, when Echo was stable, enough to leave, the vet offered to arrange transport to the nearest shelter. Claire shook her head immediately. No, she said. He's not going to a shelter. The vet raised an eyebrow. "You want to take him home?" Claire looked down at Echo, who was now watching her with calm, trusting eyes. There was no hesitation in her heart. "He's already home." Claire's apartment was modest. A second floor, walk-up overlooking a quiet street, with hand-me-down furniture and framed photos of her paramedic team on the walls. But it was warm, safe, and filled with a kind of quiet resilience that matched Echo's spirit perfectly. She set up a soft bed for him by the heater, lined with fleece blankets and one of her old sweatshirts that still carried her scent. Echo explored slowly, sniffing the corners of the room with tentative steps. He still moved with hesitation, pausing often to check Claire's position, but the terror that had once lived in his eyes had begun to fade. That night, as snow continued to drift outside the window, Echo curled up on his new bed and let out a long sigh that seemed to empty days of fear from his tiny lungs. Claire watched him from the couch, a mug of tea in her hands and a strange tightness in her chest, one that felt a lot like gratitude. She thought of all the people who had passed by Echo in the park, those who noticed but didn't stop, who pitied but didn't act. And she thought of the one person who had walked away from him on purpose, the person who had tied a scarf around his neck like a parting gift and left him to freeze. What kind of life had Echo lived before that night? What had made someone abandon a creature who loved so openly? She didn't know. Maybe she never would. But she knew this. Echo wasn't just a dog someone left behind. He was a reminder of what still lived in the world. Hope, loyalty, quiet bravery, and the aching desire to be loved. Claire stood and walked over to his bed, kneeling down and brushing his ears gently. "You're not going to wait anymore," she said softly. "Not for food, not for warmth, not for someone to love you. You have all of that now. You have me." Echo opened his eyes and licked her hand, and in that moment, Claire felt something shift inside her, something she hadn't realized was broken, slowly beginning to heal. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The world was quiet, but inside that small apartment, two hearts, one human, one canine, began the slow, tender work of rebuilding trust and rediscovering joy. The days that followed were like a cautious dance between healing and discovery. Echo was slowly learning how to be a puppy again, not just a survivor. Each morning, Claire would wake to the soft sound of paws padding around the living room, followed by a gentle nudge of a cold nose against her cheek. He no longer waited in silence. He asked, he sought, and in his own quiet way, he trusted. But some moments revealed the scars Echo couldn't hide. It was a Wednesday evening when Claire noticed it the first time. She had returned home from her shift just after dusk, the apartment filled with the usual stillness that marked her solitary life, until now. She called out Echo's name cheerfully, expecting the soft jingle of his collar and his eager run toward the door. But no sound came. "Echo," she called again, setting her keys down. The silence that answered was too deep, too wrong. Panic prickled her spine as she scanned the room. Then she saw him, curled in the corner behind the couch, trembling like he had that first night on the park bench. His eyes were wide, glassy, and filled with something Claire recognized instantly. Fear. Not of her, but of something much older. Something he carried with him still. She dropped to her knees and reached toward him slowly. "Hey buddy, it's me." Echo didn't move. Claire sat down fully, hands resting on her knees. She spoke in the same calm tone she used on patients, pulled from wreckage, terrified, broken souls clinging to life and confusion. "You're safe, Echo. It's just me. I was gone, but I came back. I'll always come back." After several minutes, Echo crawled from behind the couch on trembling legs and pressed his body against hers. He buried his head under her arm, hiding his face like a child in trouble. Claire wrapped him in her arms and felt the shudder of his breath against her chest. It wasn't the first time. Over the following week, the episodes came and went. Loud noises, sudden movements, a delivery man knocking too hard on the door. Each sent Echo into spirals of fear that didn't belong in a puppy's heart. Claire would find him tucked into dark corners or frozen mid-step with his tail clamped between his legs. and each time she knelt beside him, held him, whispered his name like a promise. Echo, you're not there anymore. You're home now. But what haunted her most wasn't his reaction. It was what it hinted at. She started wondering about Echo's life before the park. Had someone hurt him? Starved him? Had he been locked away, punished for simply being a puppy? The thought made her sick. One night, after a particularly bad episode triggered by a slamming door downstairs, Claire sat on the floor with Echo curled beside her, both of them wrapped in the warm silence of survival. She reached for her phone and scrolled back to the photo she'd taken that morning on the park bench. Echo wrapped in her coat, his eyes just barely open. She posted it to her social media with a caption, "He was left to freeze on a park bench. Now he's learning what love feels like. This is Echo. Please be kind to animals. They remember." She didn't expect the post to go anywhere, but within hours, her notifications flooded. Shares, comments, stories from strangers about their rescues, their echoes. Some people wrote poems, others sent messages of support, and then someone shared it to a local animal rescue page. From there, it exploded. By the next day, Claire's inbox was filled with people asking about Echo. Some recognized him. A few even thought they might know who had abandoned him. One message stood out. It came from a neighbor who lived near the park. She said she'd seen someone leave a dog on the bench several nights earlier. A man, late 20s, wore a hoodie and looked nervous. She had assumed he was coming back. Claire read the message again and again, her hands trembling. She wanted to be angry, furious. How could someone do that? But mostly she felt something else. Sadness. Someone had abandoned Echo, yes. But that person had also tied a scarf around his neck. A small, almost apologetic gesture. Not the act of someone purely heartless, but someone desperate, lost, maybe even hurting. She closed the message and looked down at Echo, who was now sleeping soundly on his back, legs spread wide in total trust. She didn't know who had let him go. Maybe she never would. But what mattered more was that she had found him. Or maybe he had found her. Weeks passed, and with each sunrise, Echo bloomed a little more. He chased toys now, barked at pigeons on the balcony, wagged his tail with reckless joy when Claire walked through the door. He had a favorite spot by the window where the sun poured in like honey each afternoon, and he would stretch out there like a prince, content and unafraid. And Claire? She found herself smiling more, talking out loud even when she was alone, just because Echo was listening. Her apartment no longer echoed with silence. It echoed with laughter, with joy, with life. One evening, as the city glowed in the warm haze of dusk, Claire sat on the couch with Echo curled beside her, his head resting in her lap. She stroked his fur and stared out the window, her heart full of something she hadn't felt in a long, long time, peace. She thought back to that frozen morning, the bench, the empty streets, the way Echo had looked at every face as if salvation might come from any direction, and how, despite everything, he had never stopped waiting. "You knew," she whispered into the soft silence. "You believed someone would come." Echo thumped his tail softly, and in that moment Claire realized something else. Echo hadn't just been saved, he had saved her too. The first snow of the season came quietly, as if the city itself was trying not to wake the sleeping hearts within it. Flakes floated down like soft confetti from a sky made of whispers, blanketing the streets in a hush of white. From her window, Claire watched the snow gather on the ledges, rooftops, and sidewalks below, watching as the world turned into the very picture that had once nearly claimed Echo's life. She glanced down. He was there. Of course, curled at her feet on the braided rug he had claimed as his own, his favorite torn plush fox resting under one paw. The same Echo who once trembled at shadows now stretched lazily in front of the space heater like a king before a fireplace. His coat had grown thick and glossy. The bones that had once jutted from his sides were now filled with healthy weight. His once dull eyes now gleamed with light and curiosity. Claire took a slow breath, overcome by the quiet joy that had woven itself into her every day. Echo was no longer just her rescue. He was her reason. She picked up the blanket from the couch and draped it over herself, then bent down and scooped up Echo into her lap. He stirred for just a moment before relaxing into her arms like he belonged there because he did. "You know," Claire said softly, "I never really believed in fate. Not until you." His tail gave a soft thump. "You waited on that bench like someone told you I was coming, like you knew." He didn't respond, of course, but he didn't need to. His gaze told the story. That soulful stare she had first seen under frost, and desperation had changed, but it still carried that same knowing, that same quiet strength. They had both been broken in different ways, her by grief, him by abandonment. But together, they had started to rebuild, one heartbeat at a time. Over the next few days, the snow deepened and the world outside slowed. Claire and Echo embraced the quiet. They took slow walks through the powdery streets, his paw prints trailing behind her boots in perfect rhythm. People would stop and admire him now, sometimes asking about his breed, his name, or where she got him. Claire always answered the same way, with a soft smile and a hand on Echo's head. "I didn't get him. He found me." On one particular afternoon, as the two walked near the park, Claire hesitated. Echo stopped beside her, sensing her tension. They stood at the edge of the very path that had once led her to him, the bench just visible in the distance beneath a streetlight's golden glow. It stood empty now, snow gathered on its seat like a monument to a moment that had changed everything. Claire knelt beside Echo and looked into his eyes. "You ready?" she asked. He didn't flinch, didn't turn away. Instead, he stepped forward confidently, tail raised but relaxed, as if saying, "I'm not afraid anymore." They walked together, retracing those familiar steps. The park was still and quiet, save for the crunch of their steps. When they reached the bench, Claire paused. Echo sniffed the air, then looked up at her, waiting. She sat. He hopped up beside her, and for a few moments they sat just as they had that first day. But this time, there was no trembling, no fear, just peace. "You don't have to look anymore," Claire whispered, her fingers brushing through the fur behind his ears. "You're home now. You've found your forever." Echo rested his head on her lap and let out a long sigh, the kind that spoke of safety, of belonging, of deep, silent understanding. They stayed there until the sun dipped low and the streetlights flickered on, their soft yellow glow bathing the snow in gentle light. As they stood to leave, Claire glanced back one last time at the bench and smiled. Let the world remember it for what it had been, a place of heartbreak, of waiting, of hope. For her and Echo, it had become a symbol not of what was lost, but of what was found. That night, back at home, Claire lit a candle on her windowsill. Not for Echo. He was right there beside her. But for all the other Echoes still out there, still waiting on benches, still hoping someone might see them, stop, for them, save them. And as the candle flickered in the frost-bitten window, Echo curled up in his bed beside it. Not just any bed, but one with his name stitched across the front in soft golden thread. Echo, you were never just a stray. You were someone's soul waiting to be found. Claire smiled and tucked the blanket tighter around herself. "Good night, my Echo," she whispered. "Thank you for waiting for me." And with a soft, content sigh, Echo drifted off to sleep. Because sometimes love doesn't come crashing in. Sometimes it waits quietly, on a frozen bench, watching every face until the right one finally stops.